What is the worst reason to have a baby? Why? To compete with someone. To use it as a content on social media. Your parents wanted grandkids. To save the relationship. It never works. It just drags an innocent baby into a miserable situation. To sell them. Daughters are being sold into child marriage and sons are sold for forced child labor in many countries. To have an organ donor for later? What was the reason you ended your last job? A micromanaging boss who always had to be right. I asked for a raise when I realized my job was about 5 positions in one. When my boss tried to get my raise approved, she was denied. She told the big bosses that I would walk if this wasn't approved, and they literally said, "Oh well." I got my dream job the following week. Started a job as security for a gate at a nuclear power plant. Enjoyed it. Was working 40 hours a week. Showed up every day. Didn't complain. Then they fire 3 people for no reason and make me start working 80 hours a week mandatory. I was making tons of money but was struggling to find time to buy groceries since I worked until late at night. Boss starts micromanaging every little thing while I'm working 16-hour days. Then they wanted me to start training people. Said I'd get a $2 an hour raise for doing it. That never happened. Then I had some car issues and I couldn't come in one day. I had to go to AutoZone and buy a replacement part. I got the problem solved and was good to go the next day. I never missed a day in 6 months. My boss called every car shop in town, allegedly, and said that I was lying. I bring the part that I replaced in to show her. She says that's not enough proof and that no one in town said they sold me that part. She wrote me up and then said I might be fired or I might not. And I'll know at the end of the week. I said okay, and she asked me if I was coming in tomorrow morning and I said sure. Next day I slept in and never showed up. Apparently there were trucks backed all the way up the road for 4 hours since I didn't show up to open the gate. Boss texts me saying I'll be criminally charged for not showing. I just ignored it, so she called me every day for about a week. I never answered. Found out later that she went on a power trip and fired the people I trained because I taught them wrong, then replaced them with her relatives. This is the person guarding your energy infrastructure, America. The company didn't offer bereavement days. I called off to go to my father's funeral and my manager told me it was inconvenient for them to have to cover my shift because they were short-staffed and that I needed to come to work. I told them I wasn't missing my father's funeral for their measly $11 an hour. They fired me the next day. HVAC installer here. I quit my last job because our scheduler decided she didn't like me, so when I'd message her to get the address of my next job, she wouldn't respond. I had to call another office staffer to ask if she was in. She was, and asked to be transferred. She picked up and hung up immediately. I called staffer again, asked to be transferred. Again. She hung up. Again. This was a Friday. I went home, cleaned the work van of my tools, dropped the van off at the office, keys inside, went home and emailed the boss a letter explaining why I was quitting, where the van was, and that he could mail me my final check. He called me Saturday morning asking what it would take to get me back. I told him he'd have to fire the scheduler, his wife. He said he could never do that. I told him I already knew that and had a job lined up for Monday morning. In between getting home and returning the work van, I sent my resume out to 5 different HVAC companies. In the 3 hours it took to clean out and return the van, I had 5 offers. Absolute disrespect, and a much better paying job. What caused your last breakup? Wife and I were attending couples therapy. The therapist said she was being literally abusive to me. My then wife demanded a new therapist. Second therapist said she was being abusive to me. My then wife filed for divorce. While my life right after was hell. It's come back around and I'm doing better than ever. Despite the fact we were both poor college students. She wanted someone rich, like a doctor. So, after she dumped me, last I heard, she was engaged to a pre-med student. She cheated. We had our home, our plannings, and was preparing to marry in about 3 months when we separated. Cheating and alcoholism on her side, combined with me feeling defeated and not being able to communicate effectively with her. Kinda hard to describe that last part unless you've experienced it. I felt stun-locked during every conversation, verbally walking on eggshells, to a point where I literally couldn't formulate a single word or sentence. Started hiding her phone, looked at phone, kicked her out. My drinking, lies about drinking, and shitty finances because of drinking. 107 days sober today. What's the worst experience you've had with a roommate? Freshman year of college, she came back drunk night 5 and pissed on our carpet and some of my clothes. Then in the morning she denied all of it despite the room smelling like piss. She would have random guys over constantly and fuck them with me in the room. Even though she had a BF. She ended up getting arrested twice during the first semester. She had painkillers that were not hers and she got a marijuana charge LMAO. She was pure chaos and ended up in academic poor standing since she literally never went to class. The second semester her parents required her to come home every single weekend, so it made things much nicer. Lol. Shared a quad in college with a girl named Monica. She was fine in the beginning but then began doing things like hiding the toilet paper. Trying to limit how much time we spent in the shared living room. Allowed a homeless man to sleep on the sofa and hoarded cutlery. She decided she wanted to be a vampire and had her teeth filed into points. At the end of the year we started referring to her as Demonica. Guy inherited $80,000 from grandparent. Start to buy 8 balls and bring various people back, including homeless people with obvious psychological issues. I moved out, and a few months later, I found out he was stabbed multiple times by one of these people. Dude killed my pet rabbit because he was jealous of the time I spent with it. Needless to say, he stopped being my roommate that day. I called to ask if he had his half of the rent and he informed me that he was on I-95. Headed back to his hometown of Virginia. Dude cleared his shit out of the apartment and dipped with no warning. I let my boss crash at my second apartment about 15 years ago. It was a shitty timeshare call center where everyone did drugs and were pretty everyman types. So he and I were more friends than coworkers. Anyway, he loses his apartment and asks to stay with me for a couple months while he gets back on his feet, and I agree. He's a great dude. Kind, smart, funny, confident, and a solid approximately 350 lb. I only mention the weight because it's relevant to the negative experience. So around a month into staying with us, he decides to get clean from his crippling opioid addiction. He's decided to cold turkey from a 20-a-day 10 mg hydrocodone habit, which, for the uninitiated, is pretty intense. I advised rehab, but he elected to lie on the couch in my living room for weeks, costing him his job, sweating his ass off and shaking under a blanket. The reason why his size was relevant: he sweat a lot already, and had to take pains to mitigate his body odor on normal days, with varying degrees of success. But with the withdrawals and being mostly sedentary on that textile couch for weeks, the apartment started to smell like a hot-ass forest. It was a party house with a revolving door. And people just kinda stopped coming during his tenure there. Even with my bedroom down the hall's door closed. The stench was pervasive. It wasn't his fault. I liked the man. And he was trying to better himself and his life. So I put up with it. And he succeeded. Got himself a new place in the agreed time frame. Stayed clean and everything was hunky-dory. After he moved out, my actual roommate and I carried the couch to the parking lot dumpster, and it took several days to air out the smell. We even did a thermal fog with an oil-based cherry-scented counterfactant. And it still didn't help. Kinda irrelevant. But just an addendum. We stayed in touch for a while back when I still had Facebook. And he got his life together. Got a good job as a realtor. Lost a lot of weight. Had a baby girl. Found religion or whatever. Then after a few years of being off Facebook and radio silence, I get a call from my old roommate saying that he'd relapsed and died from a heroin overdose. Pretty fucked. Rip Dawn. Subscribe, my brothers.